All right. So, anyway, I wanted to discuss again. If you see here, I have all my medications here, right? These are the medications I used to be on. I'm not on anymore. Can you believe that? Can you believe that I was on all of these medications? I'm not on any of them anymore. Let me get started, and I'll tell you what happened. Because actually, I first came into Overeaters Anonymous in 2006. In 2006, and again, I'm trained, I'm a registered pharmacist, so I had an education in healthcare, of course, in medicines and everything like that. So I went to a few meetings, and then I was, overweight, and I had exhibited all of these type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, among other things, heart conditions, stuff like that, a bunch of different diseases. So anyway, this one guy, he had lost the weight, and after the meeting, I was speaking to him, and I couldn't believe it. And here I am, trained in all of these things, figured, well, what's the answer to all these problems? The medication, right? All that medication's the answer. So what happened was he said to me he ate healthy, he lost the weight through Overeaters Anonymous program, and all his things went away. And I really couldn't believe it. I really didn't believe it. And then I went on the internet, and there was one guy there. He was a guy who was like, yeah, this guy, he would go up there and he'd be juicing and he'd be making smoothies and he'd be doing all kinds of stuff. This is going back about 9 years ago, about 9 years ago. And he had a show where had people call in. And what happened was one guy called in and he said he had type 2 diabetes. He had all of these other ailments. And he said, what should he do? And the way the guy who's moderating the telephone call said, no, oh, that's no problem. It's going to go away. So I had to believe him. Also, he ate like what's called a whole food plant-based diet. So anyway, sure enough, I went on that type of a diet, whole food plant-based, and then what happened was all of those ailments went away. All of a sudden, I started getting rid of my high blood pressure, started getting rid of my type 2 diabetes. I was saying that in 2006, I came to meetings, and a guy was there who was joined the Overeaters Anonymous program, and he said how all by eating healthy, losing the weight, he had all of these ailments and medications, and they went away. So anyway, and like I said, I was trained in this field and everything of medications. I'm a registered pharmacist. But anyway, so sure enough, I ended up going on what's called a whole food plant-based diet. I started losing the weight. And all these medications you see here, I was on like 10, 15 different medications, and I'm not on any now. I'm on 0 medications. So I just want to testify that to get the meeting started. I thought that's really important that I started in 2006. And we're going to be talking about today, Overeaters Anonymous, which is really a 12-step program. So in all of these 12-step programs, we have Alcoholics Anonymous, Nicotine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. So anyway, here we go. So Overeaters Anonymous is, based on the 12 steps, the big book. The main thing is called abstinence. Abstinence from food. And we have a book here called the 12 and 12. This is the 12 and 12, 12 traditions and 12 steps. Okay. We have also in it dignity of choice. There's a pamphlet you could get online. It talks about different food plans. And again, we're called, a lot of times we introduce ourselves as compulsive overeaters, food addicts, sugar addicts. And then we have a lot of, like I'm doing now, an OA speaker. And, we do things through prayer, meditation, step 11. And we're going to touch upon the steps as usual here. And so there's a Zoom meeting here for that we can go on and understand these different things. Then, of course, after this, we're going to have a bunch of shares and people can come on at that point. And it's great when you have the different shares. So anyway, to get started and to talk about, again, I always talk about how simple this program is. And Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, whichever it is, they're very, very simple programs. And what I mean by that is here. I have one reading. Now, here's another book. It's called For Today. It's one of the reading books. They have these in all these 12-step programs, and Voices of Recovery is another one that they have in this Overeaters Anonymous. But the basic book is the big book, right? Have no doubt about that. Well, these 12-step recovery programs. And I found my recovery, in the first 164 pages doing the 12 steps in the big book, right? So anyway, even one reading, each reading we do, and if you read the basic literature, like I say, the 12 and 12 book and 12 traditions of Overeaters Anonymous, and you read the Dignity of Choice of Overeaters Anonymous, and the 12 steps are the same, except the only difference is in step 1, in Alcoholics Anonymous, it says we were powerless over alcohol. So guess what it says in step 1? In Overeaters Anonymous, it talks about the food, right? So anyway, our lives will become unmanageable. That's step 1 alone. So I sometimes say, well, step 1, I could have full recovery just by doing a step 1. So anyway, I have a reading. It's called For Today. And it starts out like this. It says, from diets to designs for living, I looked for direction to anyone and everyone who appeared to have the solution to my problems. Okay. So this is my life. It explains it here in the first sentence. And this is understanding this. It is where I got my recovery. It says again, from diets for designed for living. So to figure out my diets, and I always say 95% of diets don't work, but for my design for living, in this program, I want to say one thing I meant to say today, and I'm going to start off by saying this. We're in our addictions. All of our addictions, think about this. This is the whole thing, is to get to that oneness. We talk about a higher creator, joy, happiness, and blissfulness. That's the reason we take drugs, we overeat, we're compulsive behaviors, we want to make more money, be more successful, is to attain that blissfulness. So here we're going to have the solution here in this program that spiritual awakening, step 12, talks about. Okay, this whole program is about getting that God consciousness, that joy that was in that source in us all the time that made us happy and joyous. And what's going to happen is that the addictions, and we talk about the 10-step promises, where we don't even have to swear it off, we become neutral towards our addictions because we have this God consciousness. And this one on page 25 of this For Today book, again, this Overeaters Anonymous Literature here, Today book, I'm just going to read this one thing, but it says here, and I said, from diets to design for living, we look for other people and every direction. I looked everywhere outside of myself to find that joy and happiness. I looked everywhere outside of myself to get over my addictions to people, to alcohol and drugs, and to food. The diets, I tried the billion-dollar industry, right? So that's where I was looking. And also, I had to realize I was being brainwashed by the corporations. Again, even in the big corporations and every TV commercial and going down the highway. So I had to have a new way, a new perception. 95 of life, the way we live our life is through perception. If we change our perception, if we're unhappy, it's our perception. If we're anxious, it's all about our perception about life. So in these 12 steps, and I had that spiritual awakening, my perception changed. And it goes on to say, but instead of answers, so here the person's saying, instead of answers, I found new and sometimes worse problems, and in the end, I lost a little more of what self-esteem I had. It says, but instead of answers, I found new and sometimes worse problems. So when we're all in the trying to take our self-will, trying to figure it out. So if we go to somebody else who's trying to figure it out, and they're as crazy as we are, step 2 said we had to be restored to sanity, then how could we possibly, they figure it out, right? We're looking everywhere. We're looking when I would go to meetings, we always say we're in the problem or we're in the solution. So we're either in the problem or we're in the solution. So I was always in the problem. I was going to meetings talking about my problems. Again, with the diet, I ate this, I didn't eat that. I should have, have this, or I had remorse and guilt about what I did eat, I didn't eat. I had remorse and guilt about the way I dealt with people. I had remorse and guilt about if I had problems with my drug addiction, whatever it was all, it was all the same thing. It's all about the food, but the food is about everything else in our lives. And it says here in that reading, that quote that I had there, that we do our addictions, we do this food to find that joy and happiness. Actually, in the big book, in Doctor's Opinion, it talks about, we wanted to get that ease and comfort that from that first drink. We want that ease and comfort because we getting it from the material things. We're not going into we could be rocking into the fourth dimension of existence. But anyway, so here it goes. The next paragraph says, I found independence when I came to Overeaters Anonymous. Independence. Do you realize I love this phrase because our whole life is being controlled by what people say to us, right? A person looks at us the wrong way, we go to work, our boss yells at us, in our families, our spouse, our children, somebody in our life, a guy cuts us off on the highway, clerk in the store. When we get upset and resentful, we're being controlled by them. We had no independence. I always say we're like we talk about prisoners being in prison in solitary confinement. My life was in solitary confinement, being in this big prison of the ego, of the self. The self-honesty this program teaches enables me to trust my perceptions and listen to my feelings. So trusting my perceptions, listening to my feelings, when we get this consciousness, not what other people think and not what we think of the worldly things, but when we get centered, and you'll see through the prayer meditation. I am no longer attracted to people who would have me believe they know what's best for me. My higher power is the only source from which I should seek knowledge. Here's an amazing thing. We go around trying to get joy and happiness, trying to find the answer. We go and read 100. I had shelves full of self-help books and all the time, and I couldn't it didn't help. No matter how many I read, it was really, the word self is in there, right? You get it, self-help. It was all about the self. These steps in this program talks about this different consciousness, this new attitude adjustment, as it says, a different way of living. It goes on to say here that for today, if I don't know which way to go, I turn the problem over to God. Okay, so again, nobody can teach us anything we don't already know. All the answers are in here. The reason we don't go to the answers and we're paralyzed is called self-centered fear, is because we're in what's called these defects of character. We're in the envy. How about gluttony? Okay, gluttony. Again, I know the solution. If I have more food, big plates of food, that would be the answer to my problem. So we're in the addiction, and what makes it worse is when we try to resist it. When I try to talk to you about all my problems, I'm making them real. When I try to resist something, I'm making it real. When we get centered and we stop fighting anyone or anything, that's what the 10-step promises. We'll be put in a position of neutrality because we're no longer in the 5 senses. We're rocketed into the 4th dimension, right? The 5 senses directly related to our addiction to food, the taste, the seeing, the smell, everything, the hearing of the food, cooking, whatever it is, it's all related. And again, the drug pushes are all around us. Again, I always say this. There's no reason why these people who advertise should be made illegal. Some of these advertisements and the food they put in the stores with, the 50 ingredients in them, especially for the children. What did they do with cigarette smoking? And cigarette smoking, believe it or not, is devastating as it was in the alcohol and drug abuse. A lot of people, unfortunately, are meeting their demise from that. But many, many, many more people are from our addiction to food. And the problem is that we haven't even identified the problem. There's the whole thing there that the corporations, due to the money, even the federal government, when they make these committees about the food, it's all most all of the people, I would say, or half of them are from the big corporations. So it goes on to say, if I don't know which way to go, I turn my problem over to God. So when I let go, step 3, and we always talk about this. Step 1 says I'm powerless, I could be restored to sanity. Step 2, step 3 talks about just giving up my will to a higher conscious, higher power. The interesting thing for me, it was always in here all the time. Like I always say to people, hey, if you have something, you have a challenge you want to do today, if you're in fear, don't even go out and do it. Just sit. And you know what happens? When we get centered, the same with the food or in our addictions and everything, we get that joy and happiness, which is in there all the time. And we let the sunlight of spirit in, even though it's there, we're made in God's image. Then all of a sudden we'll know what to do. God will intuitively, that's step 9, intuitively know the answer to all our problems. So this teaches us to trust my perception. Okay, so anyway, further down here, to God in steps 3 and 11. What does step 3 say, right? We're talking about step 3 and step 11. Step 11 is through prayer meditation. Getting centered, that's what prayer meditation is all about. And then step 3 just says giving our will over the care of God. Actually, I'll probably read step 3. I may discuss this matter with my sponsor and others whom I trust, but I give myself time to learn what God would have me do. So how many times we're going around in life trying to do things with the self-will, right? Trying to add not only our self-will, we're using other person's self-will. And we're wondering, we got to say, how's it working out for you? In my life, all of these situations and things didn't really, going around asking other people, trying to have them figuring out as self-will. It's not in God's consciousness. Again, we'll intuitively know. The answer, when we surrender, the world surrenders to us. But also the fact is there's nothing somebody can teach you. We already know. It's already all knowledge and power and feeling vibrations in God consciousness, and that's what it all talks about here. Is in here. It's all the knowledge, everything we need to know. But we're going around asking people, right? And it talks about step 11 here, just being quiet and still and being in the presence of our higher consciousness and getting out of the self. Hey, when I'm out of the self, then all joy and happiness is there. Because the way we know this is look at little children before they built their ego up and try to figure it out through the ego. Or a puppy. I always use the example of a puppy dog. Every day is the best day of their life, right, as they go along. So this is pretty amazing. This one reading here. But you want to know something? All the readings in here, and you go through any reading. I'm not even talking this book here. You go in the big book, any paragraph, any page, the steps, all they talk about is that spiritual awakening is getting out of self and a higher consciousness. Right here, right now, we can get centered. Don't fight what you did last night in your reference to your addictions with the food, or don't fight what you think you may do tomorrow. Don't get in that self-centered fear. If you're not in your addiction right now and you're being centered, enjoying this meeting, being here, feeling the presence, feeling your breath, how about that? Getting centered or having the clarity, and I'll bring up the water again here, having the clarity. So here's the clarity here. When I get centered, Do I want all of those goopy drinks, right? Going back to the 1,200 calories, I want the fresh thing, and then God's. I tell you, my body's God's temple.